Good afternoon, my name is Kelley Barrow, and my speech today will be on why we should avoid buying products made in places with low labor standards, i.e. sweatshops and child labor. Some of the topics I will be covering are countries that engage in low working standards, not just other countries but the United States as well, some of the working conditions, child labor, some of the businesses and stores that contribute to this, and how can we as consumers make a difference. When I was just out of high school, I was 19. I had already started a family and didn't have the opportunity to go to college, so I took a job at a local sewing factory. And in 1988, the minimum wage was $3.35. But I also got commission off of the bundles that I produced that day. The sewing factory I worked in, it produced the hair scrunchies. Plus we also produced some skirts, vests, and shirts. But the hair scrunchies were the biggest item, so we were constantly moving those through the factory. Back in the 1980s, you know, the big hair and the hair scrunchies were the biggest thing. During my experience working at the factory, we worked 8 hours a day. I had 2 breaks during the day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, with only a 30-minute lunch. But we were also constantly watched by supervisors walking the floor, making sure we were doing what we were supposed to be doing, and so we could get the product out for that day. So I can somewhat relate to how workers today are being treated. Now this was 1988, but it's still being done today. And shamefully to say that the United States has many examples of this type of treatment, especially in states that have a large immigrant population like California and New York. Walmart vendors have been coming under fire, especially one in Louisiana just this past July. The New York Times had written up a paper on it where workers had complained of working 16 to 24 hours a day, 80 hours a week, other than the 40 hours that the federal law requires, and for only lower than minimum wage. And sometimes they were even locked in the plant until that product was done for that day. But since the 1980s, Walmart vendors, there's 12 out of 18 that has received 622 federal violations for workers' health and safety issues. Other stores that have become under fire are, of course, Walmart, IKEA, LL Bean, Abercrombie & Finch, Hanes, and Pier 1. So it's hard for us to say as Americans that we treat everybody fairly when examples like this is happening every day. And all people want to do is just come to our country for a better life. But it is a lot worse than other countries. Workers in China, South America, Philippines, Turkey, Sudan, India, and Pakistan are forced to work for low wages. Forced now, I want to iterate forced, not voluntarily, but forced, in low working conditions, extremely long hours with no breaks, not even to get up to go to the restroom. So if you imagine they're not getting any restroom breaks, imagine if they are getting anything to eat for that entire day. And this but mostly affects the women and the children. In the country of Uzbekistan, they provide cotton to some of the stores that I mentioned earlier, where cotton is picked by children as young as 7 years old during the harvest season when these children should be in school, but yet some of them are even forced to stay in dormitories during this time to get the cotton picked. 25 countries have boycotted the use of Uzbekistan cotton until the government ends its abusive labor practices, but some companies are still using them, like Gymboree, LL Bean, and Hanes. So the next time you're in a store and you see one of those products, Imagine a 7-year-old boy or girl picking this cotton until their hands are really all bloody, because if you've ever experienced picking cotton, you know that the cotton pods have long thorns on them and they can really tear your hands up. Some other unhealthy conditions that the workers are being exposed to are like with the recall products, not just from other countries but from our own as well, where consumers are being exposed to high lead content, especially in toys, food contamination, like in the dog food that killed thousands of dogs across the U.S., and even baby formula has been contaminated, which resulted in at least one fatality. And even chemical burns have been exposed to consumers as well, like on the flip-flops that you would buy, the rubber that is made to keep the flip-flop on your foot, the chemicals in them were burning consumers. So if we as consumers are being exposed to this, what do you think the workers are being exposed to that are working in these factories day in and day out, making thousands of these products a day? So why are companies continuing to buy from these manufacturers? For greed and high profit margins. We as Americans demand higher wages, but companies would rather go overseas where they don't have to. Plus, they don't have to deal with the union demands, and they make a higher profit off of it. But to whose expense is this at? It's to the women, the children, and the workers, and even us as consumers. So how, as consumers, can we make a difference? By avoiding these products that are sold from the mega stores that I mentioned earlier. And by doing this, it will cause corporations to start losing money, and maybe, just maybe, they will be forced to start changing their regulations and to create better working conditions and higher pay, just like China did in this past year, where the workers started demanding more. I am just as guilty as purchasing some of these products as anybody, and for me not to say that would be very hypocritical. But my eyes have been opened up to the inhumane conditions that some of these workers are being exposed to. But I also understand that many do not have a choice because of the countries that they live in. So in closing, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder on. Many of you have children and would do anything to protect them. So how would you feel if your 7-year-old son and daughter was forced to work in a field all day or in a factory, not being able to go to school to get a better education just so you can have a cheaper product? Thank you for your time, for allowing me to speak to you today on this subject.